time is no longer near. It is in fact here. The host is seated with Voxcaster prepped. The guests are ready with data slates and codexes in hand. Recorded on an undisclosed planet just outside the heart of the Imperium. Lock and load your bolters and sharpen your choppas. Stratagem is about to begin.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're prepared to exercise your minds with this week's episode of Stratagem. I'm your host, Andrew Freeman. I've got some strategy experts with me breaking down your favorite 40k tanks so you can go out and destroy and conquer friends or foes. On a legal note, none of the things said in this show represent Games Workshop or any of its affiliated companies. This show is in no way affiliated or owned by Games Workshop. This show is created by 4 guys in a small broom closet that enjoy nerding out to OP formations that put so much cheese on the board. It makes grown Sasquatches cry. I got you.
We're going to cut out their living guts and use them to grease the treads of our tanks. We're going to murder those lousy Hun bastards by the bushel.
Fahrer, fertig machen. Panzergranate laden.
All right, all tanks, move forward. Fuck.
Hit him, right flank. Right steer.
Left with me, stay abreast.
Let's go right at him, let's go right at him.
Corner, left flank.
Let's bum rush this cocksucker.
Today I have with me sort of a round table session once again. I have with me Ben.
Good to be here, and this week I'm sober.
Yes, and this week we also have Brad.
Hey, you guys.
And we are going to be going over tanks of the 8th edition for 40k. Alright guys, so what changes have you guys seen in 40k tanks?
Well, this edition, the rules are focused a lot more on durability and firepower. With the changes to armor value, twin linked, and movement, tanks have gotten a general across-the-board buff.
Well, one of the big changes is that they've eliminated the armor value system entirely and almost gone to more of a monstrous creature style toughness.
So let's get into the differences between 7th edition. What was the differences in 7th edition from 8th edition?
Well, in 7th edition, you had armor values. You had facing. You had a front armor value, a side armor value, and a rear armor value. It really put a tactical spin on trying to outflank your enemy in order to get to that weaker rear armor on most vehicles. Having eliminated that and gone to that monstrous creature concept, it's all toughness now.
In 7th edition, when you were setting up your tanks, you were basically positioning yourself as you would in a chess game. You had them in different ways to protect each other's rear, and you attempted to take up as much space as possible to prevent enemy deep strikers from ruining everything. Which is another one of the more prominent changes. A single unit is going to have a lot harder time taking out a tank. I remember in 7th, I used to love putting a 10-man stern guard squad with melta-guns in a single pod, land them, fire in 2 different directions. Once I wiped out 2 land raiders on the second turn. It was a thing of beauty. But now that tanks can no longer be destroyed instantaneously by any given armor-penetrating weapon, it'll become a lot more dangerous and a lot more difficult. In addition, because you're not so worried about your rear armor facing, you can be more aggressive with your tanks. We're not going to see them purely in the backfield as much as we used to.
Another interesting thing is they've kind of eliminated the tank squad. You know, the Astra Militarum used to field Lemon Rusts, Basilisks, virtually any of their vehicles as a tank squad. Now, they're deployed within a squad formation, but as soon as the first turn hits, they are independent units.
Which is very important because wounds can't carry over from one tank to the other. You have to really pick and choose your shots and know how much damage you're going to do, or else you're going to overkill and waste a couple last cannons.
Now, points-wise, how have points changed for tanks in this edition?
In general, they've gone up. For example, the tried and true transport Rhino used to be a 35-point model. Now we're up to 75 with war gear. The Rhino is your basic transport. It's just there to block shots and protect your crew, but because it's a lot tougher than it used to be and can take a lot more firepower to bring down, it's gone up to what I think is a very balanced level.
Yeah, the Lemon Russ, it went up, but most of the Astra Militarum artillery, the lighter units, actually went down. So the heavier the Astra Militarum, the more it costs. The lighter the Astra Militarum tank, the less it costs.
And we see that reflected somewhat in Space Marines. Some units, such as the Predator, have not gone up as much, but the heaviest units, your Land Raiders and your Whirlwinds, have almost doubled in point value.
And Brad, you brought up Astra Militarum was only a week ago when we recorded it. You brought up that the Layman Russes aren't even worth putting on the table pretty much anymore.
Well, it's hard to say that they're not worth it because there is still a certain place in certain armies, and it's still such an iconic vehicle that I love the Lemon Rust. But the moving and shooting, it's so easy to take them and basically make them useless. You get them into melee, and now I have to fall back, or I just can't use that 175-point unit or whatever I end up spending on it. It is now essentially removed from the board.
So the Layman Russ is more situational now?
I find that the Lemon Russ kind of becomes little more than a mobile artillery platform, and even then it's really just a plain artillery platform if you play it conservatively.
And Ben, tell me about the Predator, and why is everyone now playing Predator Heavy?
Well, this is kind of unusual to me as a Space Marine player. In 20 plus years of playing this game, I can probably remember a dozen times I've actually seen a Predator in regular play, even less in matched or competitive play. The Predator used to be a lot of points for what it did. It came with a lot of twin-linked weapons that could only be fired under certain circumstances at certain units. But now they can be fired any which way, from any point. From your back tread to the tip of your antenna, a Predator's cannons can be fired in any direction you want. Which brings us into another point, one of the major changes. Vehicles have no firing arcs anymore, which has fascinating and somewhat terrifying repercussions.
Yeah, I have a bit of a mixed feeling about that. Not because I really have always kind of had mixed feelings about the firing arc mechanic. The Lemon Rust, for instance, has their sponson, but it's not had a full side view because it was limited on how much it could turn backwards to face the rear. I've kind of always thought that was a little limiting because it did add an interesting thing of, well, what's the firing arc on this vehicle? What's the firing arc on that vehicle? And GW never did a very good job of explaining that. So you were kind of limited on a guesstimation and common interpretation. Whereas the turret, it could fire every which way. But now, I've got the sponson on the right-hand side, but I can shoot clear through the tank, essentially, to the left side. And that's kind of mixed feelings to me, but it is the simplest way to keep track of it and keep the game flowing.
Well, like the elimination of blast templates, I think this is going to reduce a lot of time spent arguing over positioning, arguing over whether or not models can see and whether or not models can fire. The main things I used to see arguments about in tournaments, especially things that would cause a TO to come over, was can my tank see this unit, can this firing arc fire at this unit, and is this guy really within the blast area?
Well, absolutely, and add in, is this guy get covered? Does that guy not get covered? Is it 25? Is it 50% covered?
We're seeing a lot of changes to make the game a lot more user-friendly and a lot faster, which we really needed near the end of 7th.
What else is missing in this edition that was there in 7th?
Well, although I liked some of the changes, I do miss the tactical perspective of tank positioning. It used to be almost a psychotic and deadly dance to move your tanks around the field in the convoy to try to protect everybody's rear and only show the front.
One of the things that I think is really missing that I think the system still needs is I'd like to see the return of heavy and light, heavy and fast. Because you had things like the Lemon Rust that had heavy, so it could move and shoot its additional guns. I don't mind the -1 mechanic if I'm, say, shooting the big gun, the turret, and then taking -1 on the others. But if I choose to forgo that, I kind of wish I could see the still bigger shots. Especially when you add things like the Baneblade, the super heavy Titanic, taking -1s to shoot all of its guns, including its main gun, like it's worse than the Lemon Rust somehow. Or the Hellhound, or its various variants. Being able to move up that full distance and still being able to shoot 1 or 2 of its guns without any penalty.
I'm going to agree with you there. I always thought of a Baneblade as being a gigantic mobile fortress that slowly worked across the field, eliminating one squad after another. To take these minuses, especially with Imperial Guard, your ballistic skill isn't that much to write home about anyway, is crippling to an already expensive tank.
Yeah, I'd like to see anything with the Titanic keyword actually get the ability to ignore movement and shooting. That includes the big Knights, the Imperial Knights, the Baneblade, any number of the larger Titanic vehicles for any of the factions.
Another way to do it would be to increase the ballistic skill of the large things, and keep the -1s, so that when they're moving forward, they get the army-wide normal ballistic skill, but when they're stationary and have time to aim, they actually shoot better than normal.
Well, I kind of would almost disagree, and the only reason is because currently there is no benefit for having the Titanic keyword, only negatives, and I'd like to see it kind of twist to give some kind of benefit to it.
Let's get into armor saves. What have you seen that's changed?
Well, I love the fact that we have armor for tanks now. It used to be so frustrating to look at my Land Raiders and think, wow, that armor plating has got to be 1/2 meter thick. But look at that. That Melta guy just popped it in a single shot from a pistol. It used to be really frustrating to watch that happen and see my Terminators wade through enemy fire like it was nothing. This also gives us an opportunity to make larger tanks more dangerous without giving them an ungodly amount of wound or an unstoppable armor value.
The irony is I kind of almost have a different perspective on that. You know, before, I could have a sheer ton of conscripts or any basic infantry, and I would never be able to do a thing against that Land Raider. Now I can just shoot it with enough las guns, and one of those shots is just going to happen to get through the windscreen, and he's going to roll a 1 on his save, and nothing makes a Terminator player cry more than seeing a 1 on a first-rank fire, second-rank fire save.
That's true. In the old edition, your toughest tanks only existed because of overlapping and almost exploitive rules. For example, the most powerful tank in 7th was probably the Spartan under certain specific circumstances. You would take it in an Iron Hands formation, and you would use, I think it was, what was the psychic discipline that buffed tanks?
I don't remember, because
Yeah.
it was Space Marine specific.
I can't remember the name of it right now, but there used to be a psychic power in 7th that would let you increase the armor value of your tank, bringing a 15 to a 16. And then there was another rules exploit somewhere from Forge World that let you bring that 16 to a 17 and make a tank that could only be glanced if you had no, it couldn't be glanced at all, actually, at a 17. Just D weapons would bring it down. But nowadays we've got stats that can be increased or decreased.
Well, you'd have to have an armor bane.
That's true.
You'd have to have an armor bane weapon in order to ever glance it.
Melta, that's what I was thinking. You could only glance it when you had an 11 for your roll.
And that's why I loved using the Vanquisher tank in 7th edition. It was my favorite Lemon Rust variant because I'd get armor bane from 60 plus inches away.
Yeah. Well, nowadays you can create a really tough tank without making it indestructible. You can increase the armor save value, increase the number of wounds, or change the profile at which its movement, shot value decrease. There are a lot more things that GW can tweak to make things balance instead of just adding 1 or subtracting 1 to the armor value. As it was in 7th, almost every single vehicle had 3 hull points. And because of that almost universal law, they didn't really change anything for balance.
Yeah, and now you have wounds instead, and so it's kind of switching it over to that monstrous creature concept that we were saying. And having those saves, I mean, you can wear them down, but yeah, you're absolutely right. You can find ways to add stratagems or things like that that can buff up tanks or psychic powers or buffs from tech priests down the road that they can always add things in later.
All right, so let's get ripped!
I don't know if you heard me counting. I did over 1,000. You have your ubulus muscle that connects to the upper dorsimus. It's boring. but it's part of my life. I'm just gonna grab this shirt if you don't mind.